I tell you, the last two panels are reasons why people in Washington like me like to get out of Washington and listen to the great experiences at the state and local levels. This is brilliant. And all of you have the same good fortune in this panel as well, because we have three exceptionally proficiently professional presenters. So again, we have three great speakers. We'll start with Rohit Aggarwala, Director of New York City Mayor's Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability. When Rick joined the Bloomberg administration in 2006, he was charged with creating the Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability and developing a long-term strategy for New York City for the year 2030. Rick led the development of what became, how do you pronounce it,
Plan YC.
Plan YC, a greener, greater New York, the city's sustainability plan, which the mayor released on Earth Day, April 22nd, 2007. Mayor Bloomberg said recently of Ritt, quote, he is a far-sighted and creative thinker whose inspiration and work ethic allowed us to develop and then put in place a 20-year vision for improving the city that our children and grandchildren will inherit, unquote. Weighty words, but I'm sure you're well-deserved. So, Ritt, tell us why Mayor Bloomberg thinks so highly of you.
Well,
and you've got 10 minutes to do so.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Griff, and thanks to Yale for this event and this important topic. And I thought what I would talk about, using Cicero's approach, I'm not going to talk about how much progress we've made on hybrid taxis. I'm not going to talk about how we've done really impressive things, to my mind, on getting New York City ready for climate change from a resilience and adaptation point of view. I'm not going to talk about transit-oriented development. But what I am actually going to try to talk about is the way we think of this concept of leading by example. And something that we've done, I think, in a couple of places related to Plan YC that, again, building on the earlier comments, may or may not be truly best practice, but I think worked pretty well for us. And merit some thinking. And that's the actual integration of what a government entity does for itself and the connection between that and its policy-making role. And so in the area of green buildings, one of our biggest achievements last year, in fact, I would argue the single most important thing we've done related to climate change policy in New York and through Plan YC was the passage of the Greener, Greater Buildings Plan, which was a package of laws, 4 bills and 2 mayoral initiatives that was passed. The 4 bills were passed into law last December, proposed last April. In fact, Mayor Nichols and Mayor Bloomberg both presented, one on each coast, a major package of similar legislation on the same day, and happily Seattle also passed a good chunk of theirs as well recently, to require the systematic upgrades of large buildings in New York City over time. We targeted those buildings that are 50,000 square feet and above, although they are only 20,000 out of the roughly 1 million buildings in the city of New York. They take care of about half of our total square footage. And it imposes a comprehensive approach of requiring annual benchmarking that we hope will drive valuations and make building owners more aware of their energy performance and drive competition among real estate managers, a long-term requirement of changing lighting and imposing sub-metering in commercial spaces that we think will take in both tenant and central spaces. The biggest low-hanging fruit, which is, of course, lighting, as well as realign some misaligned incentives, because we still have an awful lot of commercial space in New York City that's based on electric rent inclusion, and therefore no incentive to reduce plug loads. A process of auditing and retro-commissioning that's going to be required every 10 years, every large building in New York City, starting in 2013, with an early compliance procedure to incentivize people to get it done in the near term. We'll have to do an energy audit and then have to do a retro-commissioning, the tune-up of building systems that can, depending on the building, can get anywhere from 5 to 10% right there with no capital investment or minimal capital investment. And then finally, we did tighten and take local control of our energy code. Interestingly enough, until July 1st, when the law takes effect, the only of the important codes related to buildings in New York City, the construction code, the fire code, the electrical code, whatever. The only one where New York City actually relied on the state code entirely was the energy code. And as a result, it was never really tailored for our building stock. And so now, based on the New York State energy law, we're taking local control, closing some loopholes, and we're going to have the flexibility to add things over time. But what, as big a policy initiative as that was, one of the things I'd just like to describe here is that critical to it was the fact that we had already started doing it to our own buildings. And so what allowed us to succeed in a year and a half really worth of detailed conversations and negotiations with real estate interests, with tenants, with all sorts of people around the city about this package, to get very much into the weeds of what the implications were, any unintended consequences, the complications of how people would have to comply, were the fact that starting in 2007, we had already begun this whole portfolio approach to New York City's own buildings. The city owns about 3,000 structures, ranging from police precinct houses to public schools, including the municipal building, which is a 30-story skyscraper, and of course a lot of single-story buildings, particularly in the boroughs. And that comprises between 6 and 7%, given the year, of New York City's total energy consumption is New York City government. The city has a $1 billion a year energy budget for city government. And so setting, as Mayor Bloomberg in 2007 set a 30 by 30 reduction target for the citywide carbon footprint, we also set a 30 by 17, so in 10 years, goal for doing so in the city government's own carbon footprint. And that, I think, really across the board has given us a lot of credibility. But even more so, the day-to-day difficulty and lessons of actually implementing a system-wide benchmarking. So we've already got, we had, as of last year, we got the whole public school system into the portfolio manager tool, 1,300 public schools in New York City. We're actually right now in the process of dumping into the system the rest of the roughly 1,500 buildings the city owns. Having done that centrally through our local version of the GSA, that's actually one lesson, that doing this centrally is so much easier than doing it on a building-by-building basis. But it also allowed us to see how frequent some of the data gaps that building owners and managers often said, well, wait a minute, but it's actually not that easy necessarily to get the outside square footage, and doesn't that make a big difference? And things like that that had been brought to our attention. And I think in retrospect, if we had just looked at this as a policy proposal rather than also looking at it as a landlord ourselves, we would not have understood some of the issues that people brought to us. We would not have been able to know, in fact, whether they were real, whether they were smoke screens, whether they were solvable, whether they were nuisances but not actually major challenges. The same thing happened when we were doing energy audits. So historically, New York City, over the last 10 years, working with the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, has been doing energy audits on its buildings, but it did so at the rate of roughly 10 a year. And as you can imagine, if you've got a building stock of 3,000 and you're doing 10 a year, the changeover rate is not going to get you very far. But one of the things we found, for example, was the standard audit type we were doing was an ASHRAE level 3, an investment grade audit, which, given that we aren't doing specific project financing on each individual project, was a gold-plated level of analysis when all we really needed was a managerial level of analysis, because we were making our own decisions. And so it was based on that that we really understood from firsthand experience what it was to shift from the level 3 standard to what we are now putting in place and expanding our ability. This year we will have done 100 energy audits, which is just shy of, not quite at, the run rate we need to comply with our own law going forward. But that meant that we have a team that's now essentially doubled in size over at the Department of Citywide Administrative Services that knows what it is to do a at-scale comprehensive audit approach. Similarly, we're in the process right now of a portfolio type retro commissioning approach that will look at operations and maintenance processes in a wide range of city buildings all at once so that we know how to do it. And I think it's that kind of experience that is what really makes leading by example necessary. I think we all know that leadership by example can inspire because it will lead people to imitate what you do. I think we all appreciate, and particularly policy people and elected officials such as I'm sitting with know that you never have credibility unless you're willing to put your money where your mouth is, and that's the other reason to do leadership by example. But as I look back at the last several years, I think, in fact, what was most valuable for us, and if our green buildings laws are, in fact, successful, are, in fact, as easy to comply with as I think they will be, and in fact, I believe will produce far more savings than the 5% cut in our citywide carbon footprint that we've projected from it. If that's true, I think we will look back and think that the biggest benefit we got from leadership by example was actually the fact that we got really smart about the policies we were going to ask other people to do, having tried them ourselves. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Rit. I think the mayor is right. Now, just to demonstrate and just to prove that not all good examples come from the East Coast, our next presenters are going to provide the West Coast. And as a person who grew up in the Great Pacific Northwest, I'm very happy to see Valerie and Greg Nichols here. We'll start with Valerie Brown, who is the Vice Chair of the Sonoma County, California Board of Supervisors and was elected President of the National Association of Counties on July 15, 2009. Ms. Brown was appointed by the governor to represent Sonoma County's 1st District in August 2002 and was elected to a full term later that year. Valerie, tell us what's going on in California and your county.
I would adore doing that. Actually, this is an interesting panel that you put together because we were all in Copenhagen for COP15 in December and using all of our leadership skills to try to move an agenda forward which recognized local government. And what I'm going to do today is kind of talk to you about 3 different levels of leadership because those are kind of the levels that I experience and the roles that I have. I sit on the ICLEI USA board, and the objective in any kind of global agreement that comes up, recognizing what we're dealing with in terms of climate protection, is that local government is somehow identified as a partner or a person at the table. And currently that's not so. We find that very often to be what occurs, but we in local government know that most innovation, most best practices do come from local government, and so we really need to be at that table. So on the global level, we're doing everything that we can to work with partners throughout the global enterprises, through United Cities and local governments and through some other organizations to try to make sure that regardless of what the conversations are, they include local government. The next level for me is as the president of the National Association of Counties. We have been incredibly energized, even though 70% of our counties, and there are 3,000 counties in the United States, I'm sorry Connecticut doesn't have any, but 2,600 of them belong to the National Association of Counties. We have about 70% of those counties that are rather rural in nature, kind of conservative in their thinking, haven't quite come on board with the issue of global warming. However, in this new administration, federal administration, watching what they're doing around DOE grants, watching what they're doing around sustainable livable communities, all of a sudden there's money. And so they want to be involved in that. So they're rethinking, maybe they'll do away with the global warming piece and maybe become more involved in how can we get that money into our communities. So it's a very interesting, money does speak pretty loudly. And so at the National Association, we formed a green government initiative that was in partnership with private industries. And I put some materials out on the desk for you, but those of you who may be watching it later, they can go to the naco.org website and get any of them. But you can see on the documents I'm giving you a wonderful list of partners. And what we're trying to do is coalesce information in a way that we can distribute it, give people an idea about what opportunities they have, what partnerships from a regional or from an independent basis that they can absorb themselves in and perhaps be more energy efficient. We're also finding that it really doesn't make any difference where you live. Kids are starting to pay attention. And they're driving the message up to elected leaders that they need to be paying attention to. They need to do more recycling. They need to turn off the water tap. They need to pay attention to what's green and what's not. So I think a lot of young parents are doing the same. So it's caused elected leaders to look a little differently at their policy development. I'd like to now drill it down to the local level for me. I live in Sonoma County, California. I'm actually the chairman of the board of directors, our board of supervisors. We have 5 supervisors, and Sonoma County is 480,000 people, and we have a very energetic, aggressive policy around climate protection. I'm thinking that it's probably because we all have a half-full glass of wine with us, but maybe or maybe not. The truth is, all of our 9 cities and our county signed resolutions, and I think one of our earlier speakers talked about the need to work together and come to some kind of cooperative system among elected officials. All 9 cities in the county signed on to resolutions to reduce greenhouse gases 25% below the 1990 levels by the year 2015. Incredibly aggressive. What it did, though, is it was a wake-up call to the community to rethink how what our carbon footprints were, what our transportation policies were, what our land use policies were, what our issues around bike safety, pedestrian passageways. And it pushed us in a totally different direction. And the first thing that we realized is that it was probably going to be harder to get people out of their cars than it was to get them to retrofit their homes or their businesses. So we lobbied with Palm Desert and Berkeley to get a legislation which authorized us to do voluntary benefit assessment districts, meaning that we could, with some backing of money, offer up permanent retrofits for homes and for commercial enterprises and move that into the real PACE funding, and move it onto the property taxes. We opened our program up March of 2009. We required an audit of our commercial industries. We did not require one of our residential. We thought it would be somewhat of a disability for folks. They wouldn't want to do it. They had their ideas about what they wanted to do, whether it was solar or whatever, so we didn't require it. But probably in the next iteration of this ordinance, we will be requiring it, and I'll tell you why. So we started this a year ago. We have a water agency that delivers water to 600,000 residents as part of our county. And we were able to come up with $75 million from the water agency, $25 million from our county. We put it in a pot. And that became the backing for the money to allow people to do what they needed to do. I'm proud to say that March of 2010, we had $45 million in applications. We are now realizing that we really do need to reduce the rate of the interest. We're about at 7% now, so we're really moving in 2 directions. We're of the belief that if it is a permanent retrofit, and it can go from window exchange to irrigation to anything that stays with the house, it is a value for someone to use that mechanism rather than to use a home equity loan. Because obviously, if you use the home equity loan and 5 years later you move from the house, you're still paying off the home equity loan. If you purchase you do the retrofits and you sell your house in 5 years, the retrofits stay with the house and they stay on the property tax. We're doing it at 5, 10, 15, and 20-year assessments. We have found that people are making interesting decisions about what energy efficiency projects they want to have in their houses. Sometimes it comes from the roof salesman that came out to their house and said, everybody in your neighborhood is improving their roofs. It's a great insulation model. You just don't know it's going to be, you're going to save X amount of energy. They believe it. It's kind of like the old asphalt salesman in the driveway, but it's working. We are finding that people are gravitating towards solar because there's a lot more emphasis on solar. There's a lot more advertising on solar, and that may not save them an iota of energy. So some of us on the board decided that we needed to lead by example, as you say, and we decided to have personal energy audits. Not a pretty picture, by the way. I'm going to tell you right now, it's a very difficult thing to believe that you've lived in a house that's very safe, secure, and air's not leaking out from every orifice, and then you find out that it is, and you find that you would have to put, for me, for my own house, I was going to have to put in $25,000 worth of retrofit before I ever got to solar. So because of the experiences that we have had, we are now talking about the need for energy audits and that everyone needs to do it. And we actually received a grant from our California Energy Commission that is going to allow us to provide 75% of that energy audit so the customer is only paying for 25% and they can put that on the property taxes. What we've noticed in California is that it's been a huge job creator. Probably one of the largest momentums in job creations, especially at a time when we're losing jobs everywhere. And we did a little study of 3 counties in the vicinity. For 2 of the counties, they had a negative 2% reduction in construction jobs. We had a positive 7%. So we know that it's making a difference, and we know that it's working in the long run. The last piece of this is that we really would like some kind of tax-exempt bonding mechanism. I mean, everybody realizes that that's a way to go. Congressman Thompson, who happens to live in our area, is carrying a bill, H.R. 3525, which is exactly for that purpose. It allows for tax-exempt bonds to be issued for refinancing in specific cases like these programs of these PACE programs that are out there. We had our auditor controller speak to the Ways and Means Committee last week. He absorbed a lot of questions about double dipping, a lot of questions about how's this going to work, how much you're going to need, all the typical questions, but I think they got it. And so we're hoping that we're going to be able to move something through that process. If not, we're hoping we can move it under the Buy America Bonds Act so that maybe we can use it in another. So I'm throwing the net out to all of you that are here and invested in this. It really is time for us to speak with one voice if we want something done at the federal level to allow us to continue the kind of projects which I think there's no question are working and creating jobs and a huge economic bonus to our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valerie. The $25,000 retrofit tab, that must have been sobering. But good for you for leading by example.
I just have to move my furniture off the vents. That would be the first thing to start. It's kind of a woman thing, sorry.
Our next speaker is Greg Nichols, who served as the 51st mayor of the city of Seattle from January 1st, 2002 through December 31st, 2009. Following the completion of his second term as mayor, Mr. Nichols received a prestigious fellowship with the Institute of Politics at Harvard University. Harvard, are we able to announce Harvard?
Thank you for welcoming me despite that.
A visa was required.
Sorry. At some other Ivy League school up in another state, where he is residence for spring semester 2010. Mayor Nichols earned an international reputation for his leadership on climate protection. Rolling Stone magazine called him the Pied Piper of mayors for his work to protect our climate, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency awarded him its 2006 Climate Protection Award. On February 16, 2005, Mayor Nichols pledged that Seattle would lower its emissions by the amount called for in the Kyoto Protocol, which went into effect that day in 141 countries, but as we all remember, not in the United States. He began an effort to enlist mayors across the country to pledge to do the same. Over 1,000 mayors representing 86 million Americans have now signed the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement, agreeing to reduce emissions voluntarily by 7% from 1990 levels by 2012. Great accomplishment, Mayor Nichols. Tell us what you're doing now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's usually at this point of the program that somebody will observe that everything's been said, but not by everybody. So I'm going to depart a little bit and kind of tell you the story of how I, as a mayor of a moderate-sized American city, got involved in this global issue. Because I didn't set out to do that. I became mayor in 2002, and climate change was something I cared about as a human being, and I assumed that we had some time to deal with it, and I knew for a fact that our federal government had smart people who were working on it. And it turned out that I was wrong. And it came clear to me a couple of years later, actually, the winter of 2004, 2005. And in the Pacific Northwest, that was a very dry winter and a very warm winter. We had 60-degree days in January, and that's very unusual in Seattle. And that meant there was no ski season in the Cascade Mountains, which was a tragedy for many people. But for me as mayor, it was more troubling because we rely on that snow in the mountains to melt in the spring. We capture it, and we use it for water for the people of Seattle and about 1 million people around Seattle. And we use it to run through turbines to provide green electricity year-round. And so no water, there's no ability to create that electricity. And so the mayor of Tacoma, Washington, a city just south of Seattle, and I got on the radio and were urging people to shower together. And that, even in Seattle, is a radical concept. So that's why I took the Kyoto Pledge when it became law. I thought there was a moment in time that we might be able to focus the attention of the American people and the people in Seattle on this issue. And again, for me, it was a local issue. Century-old sustainable systems for water and for power were at risk. And it wasn't a one-time event, but it is a trend since the end of World War II that snowpack has been shrinking. So when you make a statement like that, there are two things you can do. You can simply make it and get a headline and walk away from it, or you can try and follow that up with action. And as I urged other cities to join with Seattle, because I knew if it was just Seattle, it would be purely symbolic, and it's very difficult to get people to change behavior for purely symbolic reasons, it seemed to me that Seattle needed to walk its talk, needed to show that we were trying our best to meet that reduction and to do it in innovative and creative ways. And we started by leading by example. We took a look at our own corporate emissions as a city, and we reduced those by 60% from 1990 levels. So we could go out to the Seattle community and say, we've done this as an organization. It didn't break the bank, and we think that as a community, we can now step up and do it citywide. I engaged the civic and business leadership, the environmental leadership, in a Green Ribbon Task Force. And I charged them with coming up with a plan for Seattle, much like Plan NYC. It was to reduce our emissions by 680,000 metric tons, which represents 7% from 1990 levels for Seattle. And they went about that work and came up with a great menu of opportunities for a politician to basically make almost anybody in our community uncomfortable and maybe angry, but that would get us to that 7% from 1990 levels. And so we began to implement that plan. At the same time, we recognize that Kyoto is just scratching the surface, that we need to go an order of magnitude beyond that in order to really affect this phenomena. And so we asked all of the mayors who joined this effort to not only take leadership locally in reducing emissions, but also to join together and advocate for a federal cap-and-trade system and federal legislation. But even when we get to the point where Congress acts, and I don't know if anyone here is brave enough to predict when that will be, but when they act, it will be a very weak bill. Despite all the efforts of the good people in this room and people all over this country, it will be a very compromised bill because it will need to take care of the coal states. It will need to take care of the Northeast and the Southwest and everybody in between. And that's okay. That's okay because it will represent a commitment by the people of the United States to deal with this issue, and that's a big step forward. As Valerie mentioned, she and I and Rohit were in Copenhagen. I had been in Montreal 5 years earlier, and as the mayor who had started the Kyoto Accord, the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement, my message was very simple in Montreal, and that was there is intelligent life in America, and we will be back to this issue, and we will help lead on this issue. And it was nice to be in Copenhagen to say we are back. We're not there yet, but we're back, and we're going to be a constructive part of the solution. And so I think equally, whatever international treaty comes out of Mexico next year, or maybe it'll be the year after that, or whenever a treaty is agreed to, it also will contain very serious compromises. It will have to address the concerns of the United States, as well as China, as well as farmers in France. And so it will contain very significant compromises, and that's okay, because it will represent a commitment by humanity to deal with this issue. But what it will also necessitate from each one of us is that we continue to push the envelope, that we not allow that paper, whether it is our national legislation or the international treaty, to define a ceiling for us. We're going to need to make sure that it simply provides a foundation from which we will continue to push to reduce our emissions, whether it's through energy efficiency, whether it is through renewables, whether it is a transformation of our transportation system from fossil fuel to electricity. We will have to push that envelope. And the leadership that we have started at the local level and that we now are very confident that we can provide locally will need to continue in order to make it safe for our members of Congress, our state legislatures, and ultimately our international tribunals to get where we need to go by 2050. So it's been a fascinating issue for a guy from a relatively small city in the northwest corner of the United States. Last week I had the opportunity to participate in a teleconference with about 50 Chinese mayors. And they were wanting to talk about how you create a low-carbon city. And if we had not stepped up as mayors and local officials in the U.S., I don't think we would have been having that conversation, and I don't think that as of yet we have reestablished our credibility as a nation on this. So that leadership at the local level will continue to be necessary. We're going to continue to push the envelope, and ultimately we'll get the job done.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Mayor. And it is nice to know on the national level we are back. We have a lot of work to do, but working with the Special Envoy for Climate Change, Todd Stern, let me tell you, there's a whole department that's dedicated, and they work very, very long hours. So it is nice to be back in the game. Well, you just heard three great examples of what personal leadership really means. From New York to Sonoma County to Seattle, it was personal leadership, champions at the political level to get this stuff done. And that's what's going to take around the world. But we have a few minutes for questions. Who has some questions for these three excellent panelists?
I'm Gabe DeBosch from the School of Management. I actually have a question for specifically for Mayor Nichols, but anyone here can add in. As you correctly pointed out, there has been a vacuum of leadership at the highest level in this country on this issue, and I think that's widely recognized both here in America and in the rest of the world. But I think it's sometimes easy to blame leaders when in reality, the leadership is merely a reflection of society. To that degree, to someone who's been intimately involved in these debates and discussions, what do you think it is about the common psyche and the narrative in in America that makes it so resistant to this idea and to change, when the average European, for example, is much more receptive. In fact, as you pointed out, there were 50 mayors from China, a country that's at a far lower stage of development that has seemed, at least on the surface, to embrace its global responsibility in this arena. What do you think drives that?
Well, I'm not a national politician, so I'm not sure what it is about our institutions that makes it so difficult for us to act when there are clear needs. The health care bill seems to me took far more effort than it should have to address a crisis that we all, or many Americans have recognized for many years. But our institutions are not functioning very well. I would suggest, though, that the fact that 1,030 mayors voluntarily stepped forward to agree to reduce the emissions in their communities indicates there is a widespread acknowledgement that this is a very serious problem and that action is necessary. So, maybe I'll steal Valerie's line. Maybe the glass of wine is half full, in that 86 million Americans now have mayors who have signed up and are taking that specific action. Our national institutions are much slower to move. And I think that's a problem for us, not just on this issue, but on many other issues as well, and something we're going to have to grapple with as a country. It was embarrassing to be in Montreal as an American with our country actively undermining any international agreement from being achieved. Copenhagen, it was much less embarrassing to be there because we were actively trying to come to an agreement. We weren't successful ultimately, but we have moved a long way in those 5 intervening years.
If I can take that for a second, there's a change that's happening that is fascinating to watch and plays into, I think, where all of us are moving in terms of energy efficiency and really wanting to see our lives and our quality of lives change around that. This administration is doing something that I was in the California legislature. I've watched now 3 administrations pretty closely, and I've never seen this before. And it goes beyond the transparency issue. We in government have issues around silos, and that places you kind of get stuck in your spot and you don't ever talk to anybody else in the same government you work in. This administration has decided that 1, agencies are going to work together. 2, agencies are going to coalesce around some common goals, and at the very top is climate protection. It's the window that gets looked through around policy decisions. You find 3 departments like HUD and EPA and DOT working together to actually look at how they develop projects, how they develop policy, how they fund projects to get toward common goals around sustainable, livable communities or around energy projects that make sense. It is a phenomenon. It's a different way of thinking. They are still in D.C., and that's kind of a problem, in that they really need this group here and the academics to be able to help them get to a place where they aren't, just really bogged down by bureaucracy, because it just happens. It's too big a place. But and that's why I think that we are confident in saying innovation comes from the local level. Let us tell you how we do it. Let us tell you how it works best. Let us be the emissary for you in selling the idea out there to everyone. Because we can tell the story just as Greg just did. It's a powerful story. It's better than, oh, and by the way, we're going to give this grant, and here's where it is, and by the way, you know. But they're learning, and it's really only been a year and a half. So I think change is a-coming. It's slower than some of us would like, but it's change I didn't know if we'd even see in this decade. So,
I actually kind of, if I could, and I know we need to wrap it up, but I'd kind of take issue with the premise of your comment, though, because I think it's very easy, particularly after the Bush administration, on this issue to think, oh, what's wrong with us, right? I mean, you look at Canada, look at Australia, right? With Australia particularly, we had this wonderful change 2 years ago. New government came in, was going to take action, signed Kyoto in Bali, and then lost in Parliament. Canada is embarrassingly far off from all of its goals, even though on some other issues that might be aligned with what one thinks the politics of climate change are, it's often viewed as a very progressive country, right? I think at the end of the day, if we get away from the question of what's the American issue with climate change and actually realize there are human issues with collective action, with doing things that are in your long-term interest but not in your short-term interest, with acknowledging that national governments are not uniformly possessed of the same power and leadership role around the world. In Europe, far more is done on the national level that here we must do on the state level, and I think that RPS map we saw a little while ago is actually one of the, Europeans don't see that because they don't do things at the regional level. They only do things at the national level. So it's fundamentally misleading. So I actually would argue, I think, to think about it that way is a prism that will lead us to miss a lot of both the strengths that this country has brought to the table, the problems that are actually going to be faced around the world on this issue.
Excellent point. Time for one more question. Tom, did you have?
Yes. Thank you, Mike. Thanks so much. My name is Tom Warwick. I'm from the American Council on Renewable Energy, ACORE, luckily not ACORN. Wanted to first of all start you all off for thank you for your great comments. And wanted to kind of zoom in on something that you just brought up, which is innovation comes from the local level. In your terms, current terms and previous terms, what were some local grassroots efforts, especially looking at renewable energy efficiency, that you felt really made headway, and that you feel would be replicable on a national scale, moving forward with, Copenhagen next year?
Well, we are actually looking at something we call applied solutions and looking at the different communities, counties, some cities, and putting together a profile of what we think are best practices that can be replicated and looking to fund those best practices so you can have people visit them and go out. You look at Boulder, you look at Santa Fe, you look at Seattle, you look at counties across the country that have decided to take a sanitation system off the grid by doing heat pumps and solar. I don't know if you've been paying attention, but please do. It's really quite a lively argument about we have propositions in California and Prop 16, which is currently being run by the utilities who don't want any community aggregation. In other words, they don't want local governments to be in charge of utilities because we won't ask people when we raise the rates. I don't remember them asking us, but I think it's an interesting dynamic that's going on right now. And yeah, I think the reason that it's being tested by a utility company is because local governments are finding new ways to deliver. We're putting in fuel cells, we're putting in electric cars, we're putting in kiosks for those electric cars. We're making sure those kiosks are regional so that people can drive as far as they want to in them. We're looking at biomass for, we're looking at, at incinerators instead of landfills. We're doing things that I think are so far out of the box that it's taking, our constituents are kind of gasping at it, but they want to go there, and it's not hard to sell them on it as long as it's not in their backyard. It's the only issue. But I think it's happening everywhere.
And I would agree. I think that there is a lot of innovation that's being shown, and that's one of the strengths of the approach we took, is that you have 1,030 laboratories, and every mayor has an ego. So they want to make a difference on that issue and make their mark on that issue. A few things that I would point to from our perspective. Seattle City Light, our municipally owned utility, which is about the 9th or 10th largest public utility in the country, is the first major electric utility in the United States that is zero net greenhouse gas emissions. Now, we have an advantage because we have a lot of hydro, but we had to get rid of coal out of our portfolio, and we had to move to wind, and conservation has been our emphasis as a new resource for many, many years. We were the first city in the United States that put in a bag fee for encouraging people to reuse bags rather than use plastic or paper grocery bags. It was rolled back because of a very, very steep investment by the American Chemistry Council, but January 1st, Washington, D.C. put into place a bag fee. So they won the battle in Seattle, but they're going to lose the war across the country. We are moving very aggressively in terms of electric cars. We're going to have 2,000 charging stations. The Nissan Leaf will use Seattle as one of a handful of markets that they're going to introduce their Leaf in late this year. So we're trying to move our transportation system, which has been 98.5% dependent on fossil fuels, to electric. And in our case, since our electricity is green, that's a 100% gain. 100% reduction. So there's a lot of innovation going on. There's a group I've got to tell you about that is the best. We now have about 80 different sustainability groups around Seattle. They formed a group called SCALLOPS, Seattle Climate Action All Over Puget Sound, I think is what that stands for. But one of the groups is called Cool Moms. Young mothers, young children. The moms are concerned about what kind of a world they're leaving to these young infants, and so they have organized themselves, and they're out at every community picnic and festival, getting the word out about CFL bulbs and low-flow shower heads and reusable grocery bags. And to me, the most important piece of this is to engage each individual human being in changing their own behavior, because then they will expect their elected officials to take strong action.
Okay, well, please join me in thanking them once again for some great presentations.